When it comes to quality sleep, Ashley has you covered with top mattress brands at winning prices and with special financing options available. You can snooze now and pay later. Plus, your mattress purchase helps give the gift of better sleep to children in need and U.S. Special Operations Forces. Visit your local Ashley store or shop online today and make every snooze count. Financing is subject to credit approval. See store or ashley.com for details.
Dreaming of overseas adventures or connecting more deeply with family from afar? Rosetta Stone bridges the language gap.
I've tried others, but Rosetta Stone's immersive lessons and voice feedback technology are game changers.
Dive into 25 languages by learning intuitively, just like when you were a kid. And here's the holiday sparkle. Grab a lifetime membership now and save 50%. Gift yourself the world. Head to rosettastone.com now and save 50%.
Welcome to True Crime Garage. Wherever you are, whatever you are doing, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Nick, and with me, as always, is a man who would like to point out that after today's show, you will forget everything else in your life. Here is the Captain.
Yeah, I'm pointing that out because we're all you need. We're all you need. It's good to be seen, and it's good to see you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend.
Today, I am closing my eyes and pretending that I am sitting lakeside in Montana. That's because me and the Captain are sipping on some Sip and Go Naked by our friends at Tamarack Brewing Company. This is a super refreshing wheat ale with the perfect amount of apricot. Garage Grade 4.5 bottle caps out of 5. And here's some solid folks that did us a solid. First up, cheers and thank you to Mia in beautiful Honolulu, Hawaii.
And a big shout out to Cheryl in New Caney, Texas.
Here's a double cheers, Captain, to our friends Todd and Carl working hard in Aspinwall, Pennsylvania.
And a big we like your jib to Jan in the beautiful Parts Unknown.
Here's one, Captain. You know how I love to struggle to say the city names correctly. So let's give this a try. Cheers to Tim in Orinoco, Minnesota. And last but certainly not least, we have a Dean all the way from over in Dublin, Ireland. Hey, happy St. Patrick's Day to you, everybody over there and everybody over here. Everyone we just mentioned went to truecrimegarage.com and helped us out with this week's beer fund. And for that, well, we thank you.
Yeah, my St. Patrick's Day song is B-W-E-R-U-N, beer run, beer run, B-W-E-R-U-N, beer run. For everything True Crime Garage, check us out at truecrimegarage.com. And make sure you listen to our bonus show called Off the Record. That's on Stitcher Premium. And all of our episodes are available everywhere you listen to podcasts. So check those out. And that's enough of the business.
All right, everybody, gather around, grab a chair, grab a beer. Let's talk some true crime. Mike, I'll tell you what, you had some involvement, maybe more hands-off than hands-on, I don't know, but you were at least the one that brought it to my attention that the 340 Zodiac cipher, if I got that title right, was in the process of being solved and was in fact solved, 51 years later? You want to tell us a little bit of that story?
Yeah, so the Zodiac's first cipher, 408, it's 408 characters, was solved pretty quickly by the Hardens, a couple out of Salinas, California. But then the next cipher Zodiac sent, the 340, people thought, okay, the first one is easy enough. Let's crack this one. And the Navy, CIA, people like that over the years had no luck cracking it. And then a million so-called code breakers, professional and amateur, developed programs and everything else trying to solve it. And the issue was a lot of them went about trying to solve it by forcing things to fit in their words they expected to find, people's names they expected to find. They sort of went into it trying to solve it with a preconceived notion of what should be in there. And that's not the right way to approach that. One of my friends, Dave Orenchak, who runs a good site about it and has a good YouTube channel about the ciphers, he's been an expert and consulted on many programs and stuff for this specific topic. And he developed software along with a team that he put together, and they actually were able to come up with the correct solution. After looking at so many fake ones and false ones that people had presented over the years, I think he was a little bit surprised when what they found revealed some real words that weren't, jammed in there. They just naturally fell into place. So once they tinkered a little bit more with it, the message came out pretty clearly, and they sent the results to the FBI, obviously, and they confirmed that they were right. It was a little bit unearth moving, the message that was actually there. I liken it to that scene out of A Christmas Story when Ralphie gets the little decoder ring and it's, be sure to drink your Ovaltine. This was essentially something like that. It was just very uneventful and not really much to it.
Now, based on the codes, because it's one thing to make calls to police or write letters to police, but the level of sophistication jumps up significantly by adding codes and ciphers into the equation of Zodiac. Do you think that Zodiac had either just a higher level of IQ, or do you think he had some higher level of training or possibly higher education?
Well, there's definitely some military connections in some of the clues. There were wing walker boots found at the Lake Berryessa crime scene. There were tracks there, and those were sold at PXs for the most part, designed to walk on the wings of planes for airmen. So there's always been the possibility that Zodiac was military, and maybe because of that, he could have had training in codes and ciphers in the military. But then again, a lot of the stuff that he used, some of the symbols specifically, were available in books that were available at the library as well. So I think it's possible that he could have just been an amateur who liked codes and ciphers, sort of like the Hardens that solved the first one. They had an interest in ciphers. He too could have had an interest, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he was an expert or trained in ciphers.
Zodiac screams Navy to me for whatever reason. I think it's partly the area, some of the things that you touched on, the astrology angle of it, and you said wing walker boots, but I don't know about 1968, 1969. I'm assuming so, but the Navy has more planes than any other branch of the military. So it screams Navy if in fact he does have that type of background. While we're on the topic of communications, I wanted to check in with you, Mike, about the Melvin Belli communications. There were some phone calls and at least one letter or postcard sent to Melvin Belli. He was an attorney in the area at the time, and a pretty famous one at that. What are your feelings? I know that one of the communications received by Belli contained an additional piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt. So we know that at least that one is authentic, but we also have the situation of Belli sitting on a morning talk show talking to somebody on the phone who calls himself Sam, claiming to be responsible, or at least calling in under the guise that he is the Zodiac. And that seems to likely have been not the case, that the caller calling himself Sam was not the Zodiac. I don't know if was that person identified. I know that phone call on the talk show was traced to I believe a mental institution.
Yeah, he was identified. His name was Eric Wheel, and he was in that mental institution. But the way this started was someone called into the Jim Dunbar show, which was a local San Francisco TV show, and claimed they were the Zodiac, and they wanted to speak to attorney F. Lee Bailey, who was pretty well known at the time, and he wasn't available. So they said, "Would you settle for Melvin Belli?" And they agreed to that. So essentially, the TV show said, "Hey, keep the airwaves open. Someone claiming to be the Zodiac is calling in, and they're going to be speaking with Melvin Belli on the show." Well, lo and behold, the call comes back in once they're rolling, and it's this guy Eric Wheel from this mental institution. He turns out not to be the Zodiac, but it seems like that conversation is where the interest in Melvin Belli starts for Zodiac. In fact, the Solved 340 cipher basically said it wasn't me that called into the TV show. So that, 50 years to find out something we already knew. But it's just interesting. That's where he decided to start communicating with Melvin Belli, and sort of Melvin Belli was open to communicating back.
Yeah, I always found the caller Sam to sound weak or vulnerable, and I don't think the Zodiac would come off like that. Just like in the one call when he calls police and he ends with something to the effect of like, "Okay, bye now," and it's very like, yeah, Joker like, or like the Riddler.
Yeah, and they had, at the time, there were 3 people known to have heard Zodiac's voice for sure, and that was the person that took the phone call, the dispatcher in Vallejo, Nancy Slover. There was also the sheriff's deputy in Napa that took the call there. And then you had finally survivor Brian Hartnell from Lake Berryessa. And they all sat together and listened for who knows how long, just over and over, to that audio of the morning show. And they all confirmed that it was not the voice they heard. It wasn't Zodiac's voice.
On December 18th, 1969, supposedly Zodiac's on the phone with Melvin Belli's housekeeper or somebody working at Melvin's home, and they have a nice, I guess, casual conversation between the two. And later she tells Melvin that the caller claiming to be the Zodiac said that today's my birthday. Again, we've talked about, we know on several occasions Zodiac has been a liar, and we've also said maybe he's really putting in strong attempts at misdirection towards the investigation itself. But I just found that fascinating that we have this conversation, and my notes say December 18th, 1969. He says, "Today's my birthday." Any thoughts on that, Mike?
Yeah, some of that, I don't know. Some of that conversation is not 100% verified. I think part of it comes from Robert Graysmith's claims in his book that's how the conversation went, and that's the date. That book was pretty much an attempt steering the conversation towards his favorite suspect, who happened to have that birthday, December 18th. So, but I don't know that that's actually confirmed to be accurate as far as what was said and verified.
You're exactly right. It's page 324 in Zodiac Unmasked, where he says that conversation took place, saying that today's my birthday, or today was his birthday. And of course, we know, anybody that's followed Zodiac long enough, that Arthur Lee Allen was born December 18th, 1933. One thing that I found fascinating, and again, I know we know that one communication to Belli is authentic based off of the Paul Stein bloody shirt, but I found this to be a bizarre coincidence that is also the birthday of Ed Kemper, and on that day, we know that Ed Kemper's not the Zodiac because he was locked up until his 21st birthday. But I found it fascinating that on that day is the day that another infamous, notorious serial killer, is being released on that same day back into the public to kill again. And here we have a conversation that may have happened between Zodiac and somebody saying, today's my birthday.
That's pretty interesting. I didn't even know that was Ed Kemper's birthday.
Let's talk about some of the other possible victims, because somebody that's always been linked and really tied to the Zodiac case as a possible, extra victim outside of the confirmed 5, but maybe even possibly the first victim, would be Cheri Jo Bates, who was killed October 30th, 1966. Now, from my understanding, Mike, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way that we kind of start linking this is that it sounds like somebody maybe in Riverside or somebody that had knowledge of Cheri Jo Bates's case and even the communications that followed her murder, that they tried to suggest to the local police, the Riverside police, that this is a possible Zodiac connection. And when they shrugged him off, he then gets Paul Avery and notifies Paul Avery that, hey, Zodiac may have struck first back in October of 1966 in Riverside.
Yeah, to me, Cheri's case is probably the most important piece of the Zodiac puzzle, because I think if we can verify with certainty that Zodiac was there in Riverside during that time, we would definitely shrink down the possible suspects and persons of interest. Just to sort of briefly walk through it, I'm sure you guys are really detailing this too. She was killed outside the library she attended. She had gone there for some books, and she went in and her car was disabled while she was inside. Interestingly enough, and a lot of people aren't aware of this, but, she was stabbed, she was slashed. After Lake Berryessa, the Riverside police reached out to Napa Sheriff's Department and said, hey, we had a stabbing attack here in 1966, and they sort of wanted to compare notes. And I don't really know why, because it wasn't a very similar case, I didn't think, in my opinion, but they did reach out. A lot of people don't know that. But what's interesting is 30 days after Cheri was murdered, you've got this typed confession letter that's mailed to Riverside police from someone claiming to be her killer. And what's interesting is, the memos from the Riverside Police Department, as well as the FBI reports, dictate, quote, the letter writer had details only the killer would know. So they're thinking whoever sent this confession letter early on is definitely Cheri's killer, and that the details of disabling her car were not published in the paper. That her coil wire had been pulled, so when she tried to start her car, it wouldn't start. But it's not true. Within 2 days, local papers published that her middle wire had been pulled, and the confession letter author wrote that he pulled the middle wire. So at the very least, we know that the letter writer in the Bates case, whether it's Zodiac killed her or not, the letter writer could have learned these details from the newspaper to include in the confession letter. And then after that, of course, there's more letters and more correspondence down there. And that's sort of how the Cheri Jo Bates connection gets rolling.
Yeah, because looking at that case, it looks like not only did the letter writer send something to Riverside Police Headquarters, but also the Press Enterprise, which would be an office there. And I believe that something was sent to her father as well. And I find that to be interesting. I don't know if all three were mailed at the same time, but if so, that kind of, that really echoes what took place in July 31st of 1969, when we know that the Zodiac was in San Francisco because he dropped 3 envelopes into a mailbox and mailed them to the SF Examiner, the Chronicle, and the Vallejo Times.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that confession letter came on the 1 month anniversary. the 3 letters you just mentioned came on the 6-month anniversary. And, as you mentioned, one went to the police, one went to the newspaper, one went to Cheri's dad, which is sort of out of the Zodiac playbook. And these letters, you can find them online for anyone that's listening that wants to find them. They're hand scrawled. They're very messy. Someone obviously went through trouble trying to disguise their writing, but there's a little Z-like symbol at the bottom. It's hard to argue that it's anything else, but it looks like a Z. So you've got that as well. But what happened is, when the Zodiac murders started making headlines in Southern California, there's a man named Phil Sins, and he started saying, "Wow, this is Zodiac letters. These sound just like the Cheri Jo Bates murder letters here early on." And he kept going to the Riverside police saying, "You need to look into the Zodiac connection. Maybe Zodiac struck here first in October and killed Cheri," but they kept rebuffing him. But eventually they did send out that memo to Napa in 1969. And I think it was probably with a little bit of pressure from Mr. Sins continually badgering them to check this link out. And when that failed, Paul Avery got his Halloween card from Zodiac in October 1970, and that made headlines. So Phil Sins decided to go to him and tell him to investigate the Bates connection. And that's how that connection officially started.
So in the Bates case, you have the letters, and one of them says something like, "Bates had to die, there will be more," and then again signed with what most people would consider to be a Z. There are a few that will argue maybe it's the number 2 rather than the letter Z. I think it much more strongly looks like the letter Z. One thing I found fascinating in that case, and a bit weird too, and the captain earlier referenced the genesis, where did the name Zodiac come from? Not for us as the public, but for the killer himself. Where does he pull this name from? And if we know one thing about the Zodiac is he enjoys taking credit, so to speak, for his crimes. He wants police and the public to know of the crimes he did, so much so that he has even tried to make us believe that he's committed some other murders even after the Paul Stein murder. But one thing I always found, and this is quite trite compared to the ciphers, the sophisticated ciphers he sent later, but in the Bates case, there was an inscription that was left at the Riverside College Library, and that was the same library that Bates attended the night that she was killed. They found this later. I believe it was discovered the following year in 1967, where somebody left like a poem that they had inscribed on this desktop. And at the end, they signed it R.H. And again, this is very simplistic compared to the ciphers later, but if they did start connecting this, RH might be a little too close to home for our killer. And then later when he reaches out, he signs it Z. Well, I mean, R is the 18th letter, H is the 8th letter. Together, that's 26. Z is the 26th letter. Is RH to the Z to the Zodiac the genesis of this name?
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting theory. I hadn't heard that one of R and H equaling 26. I know they poured through lots of people with those initials, obviously looking for any RHs that could have written that poem. And that poem, I should point out, was found by Sherwood Morrill, who was the state's top handwriting expert. That was found to match the other Bates letters and envelopes and the Zodiac letters and envelopes. So if you follow that link and you believe that the same author authored all of that stuff, then we've got Zodiac in that library. And that's an important clue, obviously, because you've got, again, suspects and persons of interest that were there at that time. That would definitely shrink the pool. And there's some key things you can see in some of those letters in the Bates case. I'm not a documents examiner. I'm not a handwriting expert. Sherwood Morrill concluded that they were the same author. But what I see is clues in the writing itself as far as words and terms. I'll give you an example. In the confession letter in 1966, the author wrote, "She squirmed and shook as I choked her. Her lips twitched." The author in that letter misspelled twitched as Twiched. In a July 1970 Zodiac letter, Zodiac wrote, "Watch them scream and twitch and squirm." Zodiac also misspelled twitch the same incorrect way. So you've got someone using the words twitch and squirm in the same sentence 4 years apart. It's just, you take that plus the writing expert already saying the writing is the same. I think it's hard to ignore that. And just one more word choice or phrase choice. Confession letter included a line, "I plunged the knife into her." And Zodiac used that a similar line in 1974. He plunged himself into the billowy grave. So I think he's so subconsciously drawing on some words and phrases in his natural writing that came through and happened to link, not just the handwriting is a match, but his choice of words and phrases. It makes it hard to think that that could be anyone else but Zodiac. So for me, I really focus in on Riverside 1966 to 1967, and I bet my house that whoever Zodiac was, he lived in Riverside in 66 to 67.
But to be clear, does not necessarily have to be the murderer of Cheri Jo Bates.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Whether I'm sort of on the fence whether he killed her or not, and we don't know what's going on behind the scenes in the investigation. I know there's DNA. There was some cigarette butts found. There was hair with some tissue on it found in Cheri's hand. And Riverside for 50 years has had a favorite suspect that they refused to let go of, despite the DNA evidence ruling him out. But they've ignored any possible Zodiac connection to her case because they felt it was it sidetracked the investigation, and they sort of refused to accept that there could be some connection, even if it's just the writing and that he didn't actually kill her.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Do you look forward to the holidays? Maybe you struggle with seasonal blues. This time of year can be a lot, and it's natural to feel some sadness or even anxiety about it. But adding something new and positive to your life can counteract some of those feelings. Therapy can be a bright spot, something to look forward to make you feel grounded, and to give you the tools to manage everything going on. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/garage today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/garage.
Rosetta Stone is the language learning program with a lasting impact. I've been using their app to learn French, and it's not just about memorizing words, but actually having real conversations. And it's not just French. They offer 25 languages. Right now, Rosetta Stone has an awesome holiday deal, 50% off their lifetime membership. Every language, unlimited access forever. For anyone keen on diving deep into a new language, check out rosettastone.com. It's a game changer.
You can live out your MasterChef dreams when you find a professional on Angie to tackle your dream kitchen remodel. Connect with skilled professionals to get all your home projects done well. Visit Angie.com. You can do this when you Angie that.
And I thought that the Riverside police, they did a hell of a job investigating the Bates murder. It's not like they, ran out of ideas a day or two later. They were reconstructing the crime. They were asking for people that were there that night to come and position themselves in their vehicles where they were during the time in question. The other bizarre thing about her murder is that we know the library where she was that night closed at 9 p.m. That would be their traditional hours, and it's assumed, or at least we have some witnesses to say, that she would have left at closing time, but it's believed that there were ear witnesses to her attack, and those people place the attack as going down in the 10 o'clock hour, early on in the 10 o'clock hour. So it's, how long between her discovering her vehicle is inoperable to the Zodiac or whoever killed her, luring her away from the vehicle and then attacking her in that alley, if you will.
Yeah, it's a very good point, because I personally think an 18-year-old girl isn't going to walk down an alley and hang out, talk to them for an hour at a time, worth of time, if she didn't have some kind of comfort. Maybe he's a similar age. Maybe she knew him, even if not, well, maybe she knew him casually. I think if that's the case and she spent a good amount of time with him down in that dark alley, it's safe to say it's not some creepy looking stranger, in my opinion. But what's interesting about that scream and the time it was heard, that weekend happened to be daylight savings time, and you set the clocks back. I don't know this, and I've never been able to find any documentation of this. I wonder if somehow the person hadn't set their clock back from the night before, and it was really 9 o'clock. And when they looked at their clock, it was 10 o'clock on their clock, and that the scream came at around 9 o'clock. So I think that's open for debate there.
And with that case, as you said, as far as evidence goes in finding the killer of Cheri Jo Bates, she put up a hell of a fight. She clawed the shit out of her attacker, and we have the attacker's skin and such under her fingernails, and maybe even some of his hair as well. I'm hoping and praying that was preserved in a manner that we could still use it today or very soon to find Cheri Jo Bates' murderer.
Yeah, there's no doubt she put up a fight, and she actually ripped wristwatch off of her attacker too. It was a men's size 7, if I remember correctly. And the watch itself was purchased at a military base, possibly in England, if I recall correctly. So again, we get back to the possibility, is Zodiac military in some fashion?
You say England, and I find that to be very interesting, because on the Melvin Belli Christmas communication from Zodiac, he says, "I want to wish you a happy Christmas," which I associate that with English people, where I feel like Americans go to Merry Christmas. Are we dealing with a guy from overseas or what?
Well, he could have just been stationed overseas.
And to your point, Zodiac used the word shall. I don't know how many times. I shall do this. I shall do that. I don't know in my lifetime, other than talking about this case, that I ever used that word. It's just not something that we use here in the United States. But Zodiac frequently used that word in his writings. So, as did the Riverside writer, assuming they're one and the same, in the confession letter, that word was used as well. So it's interesting to, is there some kind of connection to London or England, I should say, the UK, or is it just maybe they've learned it because they spent time there, or maybe in some of their movies or books, going back to the fantasy and the theatrical stuff, are they using that word because they've heard it in some of the art stuff that they've taken in? So that's an interesting thing that people have pondered over the last 5 decades.
Mike, do you have like a top 3 suspects, or what does your suspect pool look like?
I could start some names real quick that are the most common ones, and people can find a million things on them. But Rick Marshall, he was an older guy that ran a projection machine in a theater in San Francisco. He was a little bit shady. He had a couple IDs he used. Larry Kane is a name that gets thrown out there left and right. It's not in my book. I don't think he's a good suspect. Richard Gaikowski is someone whose name is out there. And these are names that are presented for a variety of different reasons. Obviously, the top one that's out there is Arthur Lee Allen. He's been looked at by everyone under the sun. When search warrants were executed on his home, they didn't find any of the weapons. His handwriting didn't match. His fingerprints didn't match the print on Stein's cab. One of the Zodiac letters had a palm print on it. His palm print didn't match that. So in my opinion, he's ruled out every which way. But, from an interesting standpoint, there was a guy in Robert Graysmith's book, actually, who called himself Zodiac, and he lived in San Bernardino in 1964 to 1965. I had to check that out. I knew his name. I found out his name, and I said, I've got to call this guy and actually see if he really called himself Zodiac. Because my thinking is, he's right down there in San Bernardino, which is next to Riverside. He's calling himself Zodiac in 1964 to 1965. This guy's either going to tell me to screw off or he's going to, fill me in. And sure enough, this guy, I talked to him for hours. He admitted he called himself Zodiac in 64, 65. He was picked on. He by most accounts, he'd be an odd person, someone that probably fit the profile. He lived with his parents. He told me he never had a date. As he's telling me all this, I'm saying, wow, this guy really, he checks a lot of boxes. But the thing was, he was never up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And, just after talking to him, I knew that he was harmless. But had he lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, he probably would have been on a lot of radars because he checked so many boxes. But I always wondered could one of his friends or one of his schoolmates use that name Zodiac and stole that moniker from him. A little bit of a side note, he was interested in Melvin Belli as well, and he attended a little junior law college down in that area. And Melvin Belli came in, and it's in the Graysmith book. He tells the story, and there's undercover police there, and they actually confronted this kid and said, "Is it true that you used to call yourself Zodiac?" And he's shitting his pants, basically, squirming around. He's like, "No." And they checked this guy out. Police are aware of him. He wasn't Zodiac, but just that interesting tidbit was someone that interested me because someone I think could have stolen his persona. But the best suspect I found personally is a guy named Ross Sullivan, because he can be placed. He's the only person ever named publicly that we know with 100% certainty was in the Riverside Library, because he worked there as a volunteer and he was a student there.
Yeah, so he would be a great Zodiac suspect, but also primarily Cheri Jo Bates murder suspect.
Yeah, he's there. He has the location. We can put him there, and his name was thrown out on an old Google form years ago. I'm going back like 20 years ago when the internet first started, and I'd seen this name, and I basically had some of the police reports. And I went down every name that I could find and ran through and checked and cross-referenced to see who was in what area and how they were rolled out. And then I came across this Ross Sullivan guy. And I said, I've got to find more on this guy because there was really nothing about him. And then the first thing I found was a sketch that a picture from a yearbook of him. And I couldn't believe my eyes. He's like a dead ringer for the Zodiac sketch. So the fact he was in the Riverside Library really caught my attention. And the librarians in the library wrote this like 3-page letter of why they suspected him of killing Cheri Jo Bates and how weird he was and how creepy he was. He liked to write poetry. So he really got me going as far as interest in the suspect.
Well, and that also could be one of the reasons why the Zodiac became a Lover's Lane killer, because if that was his first if that was his first victim, that would have been all the mistakes that he would have made during the attack. He would have learned that you can't commit a crime like that if you want to not get caught.
Yeah, definitely. And when we researched Sullivan a little bit more, we found out he had been in and out of mental health institutions. His brother married Cheri Jo Bates' best friend. So we start looking at these little things, these little connections. We already have the librarian suspecting him. He transferred to Santa Cruz University in 1967, right after the last Bates letter was mailed in Riverside. So all the stuff as far as this timeline adds up. And then we've got him matching that criteria, meeting that criteria. And we were able to find out through additional research that he had checked out books on cryptography at the library. He had some training with that. So he checked a lot of boxes. And one thing that's interesting as well is that in 1977 he died, and on his death certificate it's listed, how long have you lived in Santa Cruz? And it said 3 years. That goes back to 1974 when the Zodiac letters were last received. So, and then we can place him in Santa Cruz in 1968, early 68, and we can place him in Santa Cruz in 1977, and then 3 years prior to 1974. The time frame where he gets lost and we don't have any idea where he was and any confirmed addresses, it happens to coincide with the Zodiac crimes.
Well, and with Arthur Lee Allen, I believe he died in 92. So that's a long period. You say the last known letters were in 74. That's a long time for the Zodiac to be, if it's Arthur Lee Allen, to be alive and not making any contact at all. It'd make more sense that, okay, well, there's this 3-year gap and then the guy passed away.
Yeah, and some people say that the reason why the letters stopped in 1974 is because Zodiac went to jail, or he died, or he moved, or maybe he just outgrew whatever was driving him to write these letters. We really don't know, but we do know that the last confirmed Zodiac letter was received in 1974.
What I find interesting about the Zodiac in comparison to a lot of other serial killers in a way that he seems to differ from them is that a lot of times we have serial killers that they spiral out of control, or they get lazy or overconfident that they'll never get caught. And here we have the opposite with the Zodiac, where it seems to be the case where he was so worried about getting caught that he didn't have to be impulsive about his kills and did not have to continue to kill. The need for him to stay a free man and not get caught took over the whatever was driving him to kill. Where with these other serial killers, the addiction to murder is their downfall and their undoing.
Yeah, and I don't know that Zodiac was a master criminal. I think he was sloppy at times. I think he took risks, and just striking and leaving multiple witnesses alive, writing a message on a door when someone could drive by, as he's parked there doing this message on Brian Hartnell's door, being seen and witnessed by kids from across the street after he shot Paul Stein. He definitely slipped up and made some mistakes. I mean, if you believe Don Falk passed him while he was on patrol, that story, after Stein was shot, then he could have easily been apprehended. But, an incorrect description of the suspect went out. They were looking for a black male, and here they drive by this stocky guy with glasses and a crew cut, and they're looking for a black male. And, a minute later, it's corrected. They spin around to go back and find him, and he's gone. It doesn't seem like he's a master criminal. I think he could have been caught, and luck was on his side.
Do you think the incident involving Kathleen Jones is, in fact, a Zodiac incident?
She changed her story multiple times. It's interesting.
That's what I found as well. It's portrayed one way, of course, in the movie, and the story's told different ways throughout the decades. But just to fill everybody in, we're talking about the woman that says that she was tricked into Zodiac's car with her and her baby, and she becomes terrified of the man who's supposed to be driving her to the service station.
Yeah, and I mean, we have, as in the Cheri Jo Bates case, we have a disabling of the car, so it has that going for it. We also have her driving north from San Bernardino up towards the Bay Area, which is right next to Riverside. The person that attacked her, she claims, drove up from behind her, so they were also coming from that way. So if there's some kind of Riverside to Bay Area connection, that sort of works in the favor. But I think what we have to remember is, again, there's a lot of bad guys down there doing a lot of bad stuff during that time. And the only reason this was even linked to Zodiac is because when she got to the police station, she saw a Zodiac sketch, the composite on the wall that had been passed around to every agency in California. And she said, "Oh my God, I think that's the guy that kidnapped me."
Well, I hate to keep on bringing up Arthur Lee, but there's been so many documentaries about the Zodiac or just about Arthur Lee. But wasn't he a pedo?
Yeah, he had been busted for messing around with some kids in I think one of the schools, possibly, and one of his friends. In fact, the person that first brought him to the attention of the police and came up with this story of how Alan supposedly said, "I'm going to kill people and I'm going to call myself the Zodiac," before the Zodiac crimes. It's been alleged that that person's daughter was molested by Alan. So that would certainly give them a reason to want to see him have some trouble with the police. That could be a motive for that person to go forward and say, "Hey, Arthur Lee Allen told me this story because he's messed with his daughter."
And in regards to Alan, what about the speeding ticket that he gets up near Lake Berryessa on the day of the attack?
Yeah, that was one thing that placed him there. Also, reports that he was fishing up there or scuba diving. He had gone to that area before, so he did travel to that area. A very popular spot for a lot of people in the Bay Area. A lot of wildlife and a big lake, a deep lake. So he definitely had connections to being there. And as far as other things that we talked about, he lived at home with his mom. He wore a watch, a Zodiac brand watch with the crosshair logo on it. After a while, he knew he was being investigated for the Zodiac crimes. And I personally wonder if he got some kind of pleasure out of being sort of chased, even though he knew he didn't commit the crimes. Because what a way to mess with the police, knowing that they can't convict you because you haven't killed anyone. But if you want to mess with the police, what a better way to do it? Yeah,
I believe he was identified by one of the survivors. My problem with him is he doesn't pass the eyeball test for me.
That's one of the most troubling things in this case. I mean, if you look at across the board, the views, you start with Mike Morford at Blue Rock Springs. Obviously, he's got a light being shined in his eyes while he's being shot at. He only saw like a peripheral or a side view. He gave the best description he could, but we don't know how accurate that is. And then you go to Lake Berryessa, he's wearing a hood the entire time. Although, interestingly enough, one of the EMTs tending to Cecilia said in the police report that Cecilia told her that as he put the hood on, before he attacked them, she saw him and he was wearing glasses underneath the hood. So that's one item in there, that he appeared to have glasses on underneath the hood. And then, of course, there were clip-on glasses on top of the hood. And then to confuse things, there was another person seen at Lake Berryessa that day that police were never able to identify. He was a stocky, younger-looking guy that was described by some girls that were sunbathing as watching them. And he was wearing the same general clothing that Zodiac was wearing, although he looked, again, he had darker hair, no glasses. He didn't look like the description of Zodiac. And then you finally get to the sketch of the Stein killer, Zodiac, and he looks nothing like any of the earlier reports would have you look at. So it's hard to say which one is probably the best, but I'd have to go with the best description is the one where they saw him from across the street after the Stein murder. It's never been clearly stated how that sketch came to be, if it was a combination of the kids that saw the crime unfolding, or if it had something to do with Officer Falk, describing what he had seen. But again, you have the two amended versions of that Zodiac sketch following Stein's killing, and they look nothing like the earlier descriptions of Zodiac.
How optimistic are you that we solve the Zodiac case? How optimistic are you that we solve the Cheri Jo Bates case if, in fact, the two are not connected?
If you had asked me about either case a year ago, 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been optimistic. I mean, based on some developments and things that are going on behind the scenes, I feel more confident now than ever that both cases, maybe in the near future, could be solved. Whether they're independent of each other or whether they're solved together, it remains to be seen. Because again, I hate to speak ill of the police, but as good a job as they did early on in Cheri's case, holding that reenactment and trying to line up things, they really put blinders on for the last 5 decades and zoned in on this one guy despite DNA ruling him out. And I just feel they dropped the ball in her case especially, and only recently, maybe because of pressure and seeing success with so many old cases, maybe they're going to go down that genealogy road and try that. And we still don't know. Police have always discounted in Riverside that Zodiac was even involved. So we don't know if there's any prints or DNA or anything somehow that matches Zodiac. We don't know if these cases are being worked together or independent of each other.
Was there anything off the top of your head that you think we're missing or we're leaving out?
I was going to say there are some interesting things about Lake Herman Road in particular that we could discuss real quick.
Definitely.
The night of December 20th, for being a secluded Lover's Lane area, there were a lot of witnesses that night. A lot of people drove by and saw, Dave and Betty there at the spot before the murders happened. They constructed a good timeline. They were able to identify all these witnesses, build a timeline, check their clocks even to see if they were accurate and gelled with each other. And essentially what you have is you have a witness named James Owen passing the crime scene at 11:14 on his way to work at Humble Oil. In the Graysmith book, he actually misread the report and said that Owen was on his way home from Humble Oil, but it was the reverse. He was heading to Humble Oil, and his light shined in that scene, and he saw David Faraday's car, and he saw a car next to it. He didn't see any people in or around the cars, and he went to work. And then 6 minutes later, we have a woman named Stella Borges who is traveling. She just left her house. She's traveling from Vallejo to Benicia. So the turnout where the shootings occurred, her light shining, and she immediately sees 2 bodies there. So we have a 6-minute window of when this happened. And the last witness, James Owen, he is the one that sees a car next to David Faraday's. And based on that, he's the last known person to see the scene before the bodies were found.
Do you call into question his account, or just pinpointing down to almost the minute of the attack itself?
Oh, I actually had some trouble with Owen's statements. The next morning when he got off his shift, he's heading back home. He drives by the crime scene. He sees they're still out there working the scene. There's chalk outlines of the bodies on the ground. And he pulls over and tells the police, hey, I drove by last night on my way here, and I saw this Rambler car here and this car next to it. I couldn't really make anything out. I didn't see any people around in or out of the cars. And he says the cars were about 10 feet apart. And while he's there, just 9 hours after the shooting, he never mentions hearing any gunshots. Well, he was questioned 3 days later on December 24th, and his story changed. He told police that the cars were not 10 feet apart, but this time he says they're 3 to 4 feet apart. And then, perhaps more importantly, now he mentions that he thinks he heard a gunshot about a quarter mile down the road after he passed the scene. And to me, I'm like, wouldn't you remember it? Wouldn't that be the thing that stuck up the most in your memory 9 hours after the attack rather than 3 days later? So I've had some issues with his statements. Again, I don't want to be accusatory of him, but early on I did have some suspicion about some of the things that he mentioned not being accurate.
Well, we often see with witnesses turned suspects that sometimes they place themselves at the scene of the crime, and for unknown reasons, sometimes because they think someone may have seen them there or their vehicle in the area for whatever reason, and that's certainly an interesting, lesser-known portion of the Zodiac case. All right, Mike Morford, we truly appreciate you joining us here in the garage today and offering all of your expertise and everything that is the Zodiac killer. Is there any projects you're working on, anything you want to promote while you're here? Where can the listeners find you?
Well, I'm on Twitter. My handle is at True Crime Guy. Also, podcast-wise, you mentioned him earlier, Criminology is one a lot of people know me from. I also host The Murder of My Family. And, we have a common friend, Jess Betancourt. I work with her on a couple different podcasts. Scene of the Crime, which you guys have talked Delphi and mentioned the show. I appreciate that. We also do DNA ID together. And missing persons. So I'm pretty active and pretty all over the place. And as timing would have it, since we're talking Zodiac, I am launching a brand new podcast called Zodiac Speaking, and that releases March 13th. And that's all about the Zodiac.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Mike. It's been a pleasure. Good luck on all of the projects you continue to work on, but the new Zodiac podcast as well.
Thank you. It was good talking with you guys, and anytime I'm happy to talk shop with you.
Some fascinating stuff about the Zodiac. Can't wait to check out Mike's new podcast. When it comes out, we'll make sure that we'll post it on social media. So make sure you're following us at True Crime Garage on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram.
And join us back here next week. Until then, be good, be kind, and don't litter.
You can live out your MasterChef dreams when you find a professional on Angie to tackle your dream kitchen remodel. Connect with skilled professionals to get all your home projects done well. Inside to outside, repairs to renovations. Get started on the Angie app or visit Angie.com today. You can do this when you Angie that.